Today, we're diving headfirst into something we all experience, but maybe rarely think deeply about: nostalgia.
That's right. And you've gathered a really fascinating set of perspectives on nostalgia, touching on, well, everything from our personal memories to big cultural shifts and even how technology is playing a role. It's quite a collection.
Absolutely. We've got ideas on whether, your own nostalgia is different from a whole society's collective feeling.
Right, that personal versus collective angle.
Exactly. Starting with this interesting idea: is your nostalgia different, maybe even better, than our collective nostalgia?
Well, what's fascinating here is the suggestion that your own personal nostalgic memories might actually be, in a way, more valuable than the shared cultural stuff. The thinking is, even if your own memories aren't, perfectly accurate, they are uniquely yours. When we talk about collective nostalgia, like for a decade or a specific cultural moment, everyone's interpretation can be so different.
Right, it gets muddied.
Exactly. The original feeling gets diluted, maybe even confused. It's like trying to describe a dream you had. The real essence often gets lost when you try to explain it. So the insight here seems to be that the imperfection, the blurriness, isn't necessarily a flaw.
Uh-huh.
It's actually what allows for maybe deeper emotional connection and personal interpretation. Makes the past feel more personally meaningful.
That resonates.
Yeah.
Yeah, your own memories have that direct emotional wire. But then there's the counter-argument, isn't there? Individual memories can be pretty shaky. So maybe what a whole bunch of people remember collectively has a better shot at being closer to what actually happened, even if it's still flawed. It's like, is one shaky eyewitness better than, say, 10 slightly less shaky ones?
And this really brings up a crucial point about how memory actually works, doesn't it? Are our individual memories like these perfect video recordings, or are they more like, I don't know, paintings that we keep touching up and reinterpreting over time?
Right.
And if our own memories are constantly shifting, maybe that shared cultural memory, even with all its different takes, offers something more stable, a flawed but maybe more stable view of the past.
Mm-hmm.
And the source material makes a good point. Arguing about whose memory is more accurate doesn't actually change that collective memory anyway. It's like this powerful current, almost separate from individual disagreements.
Right, the shared story just kind of takes on a life of its own. Okay, so let's shift gears. What about the timing of nostalgia? When is it good to, lean into it, and when might it be less helpful?
The source suggests that generally having the chance for nostalgia is a positive thing. It's a connection. But it does bring up this idea of useless
Well,
nostalgia.
useless nostalgia. Like what?
It gives the examples of the Soviet Union and East Germany around 1990. At that specific moment, with such huge societal changes happening, looking back with intense longing might not have been very constructive.
Right, because the past they might have been nostalgic for was literally vanishing or being completely reshaped. Makes sense.
But then it throws in this curveball that even that kind of radioactive nostalgia, for periods of big change or even hardship, can pop up again years later.
Radioactive nostalgia. I like that image.
Yeah. And that intensity, that radioactivity, is actually part of what makes it appealing later on. It's a really interesting thought.
It is. It speaks to, I guess, our tendency to reflect on even the tough times. Maybe with enough time, the sharp edges soften.
Perhaps. Or we find some meaning, or even just a shared identity in having gone through it. Or maybe distance just lets us focus on certain bits while other parts fade out.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, funny. This idea that nostalgia is always better when slightly blurry, like an old faded photograph. It seems to pick up this extra layer of meaning, of emotion. Why do you think that works?
Well, what's fascinating there is how that lack of sharp detail lets our imagination jump in and fill the gaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
A crystal clear high-def memory might be more factually accurate, sure, but it can also feel more rigid, less open to interpretation. That slightly out-of-focus feel of nostalgia lets us project our current feelings and ideas onto the past. Adding layers of emotion, maybe significance that weren't even there originally, kind of smooths out the rough edges, maybe makes the past feel more idealized or, comforting.
So the imperfection is key.
Yeah, exactly. The imperfection isn't a bug, it's a feature. It allows for that deeper emotional connection, makes the past feel more meaningful to us now.
That makes perfect sense. It's almost like the flaws are what let it become perfect in our heads. Okay, shifting gears a bit to these bigger cultural ideas. Postmodernism as a hedge against nostalgia, and then metamodernism as a hedge against techno-utopianism. Can you break that down for us? Like, maybe in a more relatable way. For postmodernism, I think of like a movie that deliberately mixes styles and eras, but not seriously, more with a knowing wink.
That's a great way to put it. If you think about the flow of cultural ideas, postmodernism, with its focus on irony, mixing things up, questioning those big, simple stories, it can definitely be seen as a way to create some distance from sincere, uncomplicated nostalgia. It's like acknowledging the past, but with this layer of self-awareness, a bit detached.
And metamodernism.
Well, that came later, and it's partly a reaction to that sometimes overly optimistic belief that technology will just fix everything.
But techno-utopianism bit. Yeah.
Exactly. Metamodernism kind of recognizes both the potential and the limits of technology. So in that sense, it acts as a counterweight to just blindly embracing the future. And maybe that creates space for a different kind of looking back, maybe a bit more sincere after all the postmodern irony.
Interesting. So these cultural movements are almost like different ways society thinks about time, looking back or looking forward. And speaking of technology, there's this really provocative idea. Technology simultaneously makes us more intelligent and more stupid, and that nostalgia trips can act as a kind of necessary balance. What's the thinking there?
The argument seems to be that while, yes, new tech gives us amazing access to info and new abilities, it might also make us rely on it so much that we lose certain skills or ways of thinking.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
So in that context, deliberately engaging with the past through nostalgia could be a way to reconnect with those older skills or values or ways of life. It offers a kind of grounding, maybe, a different perspective to balance out the relentless forward push of tech.
It's like we need to consciously hit pause sometimes, just to remember what we might be losing or overlooking as we race ahead. I also love how the source puts it, that our personal nostalgias are like places that other people have never visited and might find interesting. That image of your memories as unique destinations.
That really nails the deeply personal yet potentially universal aspect of nostalgia, doesn't it? Your specific memories, the things you feel nostalgic for, they're unique to your life.
Right.
But the underlying emotions, the themes, longing, joy, connection to a time or place, those are often shared human experiences. That's probably why sharing our personal nostalgias can be so compelling. It gives others a peek into a different world, a different perspective, even if they don't share the exact memory.
Now let's dig into tradition. The source has this really nuanced take. Tradition is somewhere to come back to, but not a permanent residence, to avoid phony nostalgia. Yeah, what does that mean exactly? Maybe like a superficial longing for a past you don't really understand or feel just because it's trendy.
That sounds right, like an inauthentic attachment. And this view of tradition is quite insightful, I think. It sees the value in having roots, right? A foundation to return to for comfort or perspective. But it warns against getting stuck there just for the sake of it. That phony nostalgia idea suggests, yeah, a superficial connection without real understanding or feeling.
And then there's that really powerful line, the only tradition is to evolve to a higher consciousness.
Yeah, that reframes tradition entirely, not as this static set of rules, but as a continuous process of growth, of improvement for humanity.
And then it connects these traditions to finding possible human universals.
Yeah.
How does that work? How do traditions help us spot those?
Well, if you look across different cultures, across history, you start seeing common threads in traditions, right? Shared values, recurring patterns of behavior.
Right.
Those recurring bits might point towards something fundamental about the human experience, things that are maybe inherent to us, regardless of culture or time period.
The source also suggests that nostalgia often pops up when we feel something has been wrongfully abandoned. That really clicks for me. It's not just missing something. It's feeling like it was dropped too soon, maybe without good reason.
Exactly. It adds a layer beyond simple longing. There's a sense of loss, maybe even injustice tied to the past. This could be anything, a style of music, art, a way of life, values, even a technology that got replaced.
Yeah.
That feeling that it was wrongfully abandoned really fuels the nostalgic wish for its return or revival.
And then there's this stark contrast, the duality. Nostalgia, at its most benign, is an escape. At its worst is a form of imprisonment because you can't escape from it. That's a powerful difference.
It really highlights the whole spectrum of how we can relate to the past, doesn't it? In its milder forms, yeah, it's a comforting little retreat, a temporary break from present stress.
Sure.
But when it becomes all-consuming, when we get fixated on a past that's gone and idealize it so much that it stops us from engaging with the present, well, then it can become a trap, a kind of self-imposed imprisonment.
Now, this is interesting, the cycle of art and nostalgia. It starts with an artist's idea.
Yeah.
It gets created, becomes popular, then maybe fades, and later gets rediscovered as nostalgia. So something totally mainstream can eventually become something we long for from the past.
That's a great way to picture it. When something artistic perfectly captures the spirit of its time, it resonates, it gets popular. But, tastes change, time passes. That initial connection might weaken. But the work itself is still there. Future generations encounter it, see it through the lens of history, maybe tinged with a sense of longing for that bygone era, and that's often when it shifts into the realm of nostalgia.
And it points out that all cycles are not created equal. It contrasts the sort of optimistic anticipation at the start of college
Right, that hopeful feeling.
with the bitter nostalgia maybe after a presidential term ends. That really drives home how the context of the past shapes the feeling.
The emotional weight, the specific circumstances around that period you're looking back on, they profoundly influence the kind of nostalgia you feel. Hopeful youth feels very different from, say, the complex, maybe disillusioning end of a political era.
Then there's this prediction, maybe films from, say, 2019 won't evoke the same warm nostalgia in the future as films from the 1940s do now.
Yeah.
What's the thinking behind that? Is it just too soon or something else?
It's speculative, yeah, but intriguing. Maybe it reflects just how fast things change now. The cultural and technological leap between the 1940s and today is massive, right?
Yeah.
That creates a huge sense of distance, novelty when we look back.
True.
The changes between 2019 and, say, 2050 might feel less dramatic. Or maybe it's the sheer volume of media now. Does any single thing have the chance to get that iconic status that fuels really strong nostalgia later?
Okay, let's shift to urbanism for a second. The source talks about the malifications of the 70s leading to chain restaurants popping up in small downtowns
Right, replacing the local spots.
and creating this melange of nostalgias where the original charm gets diluted. And then this stark warning, nostalgia disappears the more you mess with it.
Yeah, that really speaks to the fragile link between nostalgia and, like, the authenticity of a place. Nostalgia is often so deeply tied to specific physical spots and their unique character. When those places get changed, homogenized by generic chains, that genuine link to the past weakens. That melange of nostalgia suggests a confusing, watered-down experience. The real feeling for a specific time and place gets lost in this sea of manufactured familiarity.
So trying to bottle it ruins it.
Pretty much. The more you try to artificially recreate or commercially exploit nostalgia, the more fake and less emotionally resonant it becomes.
Okay, let's talk about the internet. It's referred to as silicon snake oil in one source, drawing on a book from '95 that questioned its huge transformative power.
Right, suggesting maybe it's not the guaranteed engine of progress we always assume.
And then it paints this really futuristic picture. Dense cities, raised suburbs, these urban ecosystems for autonomous vehicles, and suburbia on wheels in self-driving RVs. Comparing it to 1950s Airstream vacations, that's quite a vision.
It's definitely a thought-provoking take on how tech might reshape our physical world and how we live. That silicon snake oil comparison hints at skepticism about the internet's power to fundamentally change our physical existence in the same way earlier tech, like the car, reshaped everything in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And the self-driving RV idea, suburbia on wheels, is a fascinating way to think about how our desire for mobility and home might evolve with autonomous tech, kind of echoing earlier nomadic lifestyles, but with Wi-Fi.
It includes that really powerful quote from Silicon Snake Oil. Life in the real world is far more interesting, far more important, far richer than anything you'll ever find on a computer screen. That feels particularly relevant when we're talking about where nostalgia comes from.
It strongly emphasizes that idea, doesn't it? That genuine firsthand experiences in the physical world are the bedrock of our memories, and therefore our nostalgia. While the internet offers amazing connections and info, it's those tangible, embodied experiences that tend to carry the most emotional weight and become the things we long for.
There's also an interesting point about black and white photography. We associate it with the past, obviously, so it feels nostalgic. But then colorizing those photos, it says nostalgic can work in both directions.
Well, the black and white itself carries that nostalgic feel for older times, but then colorizing them, while it's meant to make them feel closer to how we see things now, can actually trigger a different kind of nostalgia. Maybe for a perceived simpler time or a romanticized view of the past that the original black and white photo represented. So adding color doesn't kill the nostalgia, it just shifts its focus, or maybe adds another layer to how we connect with that past image.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, here's a slightly funny observation. It's cooler to be good at being cool than the cool that used to come from playing an instrument.
Huh.
Yeah.
And this is linked to the prevalence of ready-made nostalgia. What's the connection there? Being good at being cool versus actual skills.
The idea seems to be that the definition of cool has maybe shifted. away from cultivating a skill and creating something yourself, like learning guitar, towards curating an image, a persona being good at being cool. And this shift, the source suggests, contributes to ready-made nostalgia because the cool itself becomes something pre-packaged, easily consumed. It might lack the depth and personal investment that fuels more authentic, deeply felt nostalgia.
That's a really sharp way to think about how cultural values shape what we end up feeling nostalgic for. Now, comparing TV as a mature medium to the still evolving internet, the source says the internet is almost all future at the moment, with some nostalgia and cautionary tales.
As the internet keeps developing and getting deeper into our lives, our main focus is still very much on its future potential, the new possibilities.
True.
We do see bits of nostalgia for the early internet, dial-up sounds or old websites.
You said exactly. And cautionary tales about its downsides. But its dominant vibe is still future-focused. TV, though, it's been around so much longer, has a more established history. It naturally triggers stronger nostalgia for past shows, past ways of watching.
Right, Saturday morning cartoons,
Yeah.
appointment viewing. Okay, there's also a discussion about the decline of, say, traditional music education or the DIY ethic, that we might be losing valuable skills and knowledge. The source suggests nostalgia can bring back interest in these things among younger generations, which is good, but the original essences are lost. That feels a bit sobering.
It does. It highlights those inevitable trade-offs with progress, doesn't it? In our rush to embrace the new, we can accidentally discard valuable parts of older traditions or practices. And while nostalgia can spark renewed interest, which is great, the lack of direct lived experience and how these revived things get integrated into new tech contexts means the original understanding, the nuances, that essence might get altered or watered down. It's not quite the same.
And a heads up here for creators. Making stuff solely from miscellaneous bits of nostalgia risks being seen as unoriginal, maybe even exploitative.
Right, like pillaging.
Yeah, and proving it's just homage can be tricky. So something to be mindful of when drawing inspiration from the past.
That's a really crucial point for anyone doing creative work. Drawing inspiration from the past is natural, often essential, but just grabbing random nostalgic bits without a deeper understanding or a unique vision, that can easily seem derivative. Authenticity, a clear artistic intent, that's key when you're playing with nostalgia.
Okay, this feels like a really key takeaway. Getting rid of nostalgia entirely can lead to a myopic vision of the future. We actually need that connection to the past, it seems, for a well-rounded view of what's coming.
Absolutely. Nostalgia isn't just about warm, fuzzy feelings. It gives us crucial context, perspective, a sense of continuity. Understanding and appreciating the past gives us valuable insights for the future, helps us avoid repeating mistakes, maybe build on lessons learned.
But then there's this slightly tricky statement. Nostalgia for a past that is the future isn't a future at all. What exactly does that mean?
It's a clever way of saying that just trying to recreate or idealize some past vision of what the future was supposed to look like, well, that's not real progress.
Like, retrofuturism isn't the actual future.
Exactly. True innovation needs to move beyond old ideas, not just keep recycling old concepts of what the future should be.
And this just rings so true. Today's nostalgia is often yesterday's banality. The everyday stuff we totally take for granted now.
Might be exactly what we'll long for later, yeah.
Yeah. The mundane moments, things we barely notice now, could be what future generations or just our older selves look back on with real fondness. A good reminder to maybe appreciate the present a bit more. The source argues that our understanding, especially Patek, is shaped by one invention after another, and just relying on nostalgia isn't enough because that direct experience fades. This leads to the idea of cybernation as a way to give experiences resonance for the future. And just for clarity, cybernation here seems to mean like a deliberate effort to document and preserve our experiences, especially with tech.
So future generations can engage with them more directly, understand the original context better.
Yeah.
As time goes on, that lived experience of past tech just inevitably fades. Relying only on nostalgic memories gives an incomplete, maybe distorted picture.
So cybernation is like proactive archiving.
Exactly. A way to give future folks a more direct, contextualized understanding than just faded memories or stories.
This is a fascinating historical perspective. You need modernity to contemplate antiquity. Yeah. The idea that the ancients probably didn't even have a specific word for nostalgia like we do.
But that's a profound thought. It suggests the whole concept of nostalgia, that specific longing for a distinct lost past, might be a product of having a certain historical awareness, a sense of separation from the past that maybe comes with modernity.
So before that,
Maybe the focus was more on cycles or just a more integrated relationship with the past without that specific sentimental yearning we call nostalgia today.
and sometimes it's really simple, this observation. Nostalgia might be an indication that you don't like where you are.
Precisely. Sometimes it really is that straightforward. Longing for the past can just be a direct reflection of being unhappy with the present, a signal that something's missing now, or that we think the past offered something better.
It's interesting that traditional instruments and physical recordings, like vinyl, are likely to stick around, even with everything going digital.
Yeah, because they hold symbolic value.
Right, and offer that tangible connection we still seem to crave. Even with all the tech, we want that physical link.
It speaks to a basic human need for tangible things, sensory experiences. Instruments, records, they're not just functional. They carry cultural, personal meaning. They offer a tactile connection to music, to the past, that digital files, however convenient, just can't fully replicate. It reminds us we live in a physical world.
This one's almost philosophical. The first thing God created was the journey, then created doubt and nostalgia.
That's beautiful, isn't it? Evocative. It suggests that the human experience of moving forward, being on this journey, is inherently tied to uncertainty and longing for what's behind us. It implies doubt and nostalgia are just fundamental parts of being human, almost built in.
And finally, this great example, the 1979 disco demolition event.
Oh yeah, in Chicago.
Right. Something so widely disliked, even actively destroyed then, but later it became influential and experienced a huge resurgence through nostalgia. That just perfectly shows how much our feelings and cultural values can completely flip over time.
It's a perfect case study, isn't it? How tastes and perceptions evolve dramatically. What's rejected, even hated, in one era can be reevaluated, even celebrated, in another, often seen through that nostalgic lens. It highlights the cycles of culture and the past's enduring power to pop back up and be reinterpreted in totally unexpected ways.
What seemingly ordinary parts of our current lives, our current experiences, do you think will become the things people get intensely nostalgic for in, say, 30 or 40 years? And what will that nostalgia tell future generations about how we're living today?
That's a great question to ponder.
It's definitely a lot to chew on. Well, thanks for exploring the depths of nostalgia with us.
My pleasure. It was fascinating.